Welcome to One-on-One with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for tuning in today. Well, I hope everyone is staying home and finding ways to stay grounded, and we hope that our conversations and these programs will help to ensure that physical distancing doesn't lead to social isolation. So thanks again for joining us. Very pleased today that our guest is Sergey Lagodinsky. He's a member of the European Parliament from Germany. He's a lawyer, and he's a member of the Green Party in Germany. He's also the recipient of a master's degree in public administration from the Kennedy School at Harvard University. He entered political life in 2001, and during that time with the Social Democratic Party, he held a number of very important positions, including being a founder or the founder of the party's Jewish caucus. And then in 2011, he became a member of the Green Party, where he is the vice chair on the Committee for Legal Affairs. He's also the Parliament's chair of delegations to the EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee. And he's vice chair of the Parliament's Working Group on Anti-Semitism, which of course is a committee that B'nai B'rith has allied itself with and works closely with. So today we'll be talking about a number of issues, including the European reaction to the coronavirus. We're talking about the Working Group on Anti-Semitism, which I just mentioned, and some other issues that affect the Jewish community and that affect Europe and all Europeans. So Sergey, thank you very much for joining the program today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, before we start with Europe and the coronavirus, which is very much on our minds, of course, we'd like to talk about your personal journey. It's a very interesting odyssey from the USSR to a seat in the European Parliament from Germany. So if you can, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, nowadays it feels more from the USSR to the quarantine in a flat in Berlin. Yeah, this was an interesting journey, and I'm happy that probably some of your viewers, as opposed to many others, know where Astrakhan is, and or maybe they can pronounce my name better, because many of the viewers are probably themselves of Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian origin, and that, of course, something that I feel very strongly when I'm in touch with representatives of American Jewry, of international Jewry. We came to Germany in 1993, like many Russian Jews came, and it was an immigration that actually started into the eastern German part. A lot of Russian Jews, we're very grateful to the Americans and the American movement who fought for our rights to immigrate to the United States. But once the Iron Curtain was down, it was not so easy to get to the United States. It was easy to get out of Russia, but there were not so many countries where you could go. And some people went to Eastern Germany and stayed there. And ever since, there is this tradition, and there is a formal program for Jews from the former Soviet Union to come to Germany, and we are one of them. And so I was basically, shaped and formed by these two political and identity issues. One issue is being Jewish, minority, not religious minority, interestingly, in the Soviet Union, but a minority which with a strong sense of identity. And on the other hand, being shaped by the perestroika years, by the time when you were able to see that the world that you grew up in was not the actual world in which the rest of the humankind lives, and that's how you start to value civil rights and freedom and liberty. Pesach time, it's a very current topic, and this is something that drives me until today, and actually brought me into politics. How to shape and to keep alive a vivid democratic space for everyone, including minorities like Jews.
So you chaired or founded the Jewish caucus in the party. The Jewish population of Germany, when your family arrived, was probably somewhere between 30 and 40,000. Now it's grown to, some people say, as close as to 200,000 perhaps. How did that affect you growing up? And what led you to think that a career in politics would be a good career path for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what drove me into politics, into law, and I think a lot has to do again with the story of being not just someone who is a minority, but who is a minority in a new country, in a country where you're trying to orient yourself and to help your parents and grandparents to establish themselves, or to at least feel more comfortable, and you want to know how this country works, and you want to know the laws of this country. That's why I studied law. And you also want to shape and to participate and to somehow become part of it, of the society. So I think a lot of what I also experienced in the 90s is Germany and Jews. We're not talking about the past. Let's focus on the present, even though it's not possible to do without each other. But Germany in the 90s and Jews was a very complicated story. I usually say it's more up to therapists to judge on this very complex relationship of Germany and Jewry today. But one thing that I learned very fast is that the Jews were objects. We were objects of, we were projection screens for this German society, because there were so few Jews. And a lot of German friends of mine grew up without having any contact with Jews, but they learned about Jews, mostly dead Jews. It was a lot about the Holocaust. It was very little about the Jewish life and what it means to be and to see and to interact with Jews. And that had consequences. This is a very, the German way of dealing with history is something that I really applaud, at least if we talk about Western Germany. But it's a very complex issues with Jews often being reduced to objects of history, and rarely being viewed and perceived and engaged as subjects, as someone who is an actor in the German society. This has something to do with very few Jews that were there. But now there are more Jews, as you mentioned. So from 20,000 approximately in the 80s to, it depends on how you count, let's say 150,000 that we have now. And still, in an 80 million country, it's not so many. And also, there is this very, I say it, historizing, that Jews are attached to the Holocaust. It is about history. It is about something from the past. And yes, you feel, in the German society, they instill in you feeling respect and mourning the dead, etc. But it's very rarely about the life living Jews. And that's why that was my driver. That's why I thought, it's time to engage in politics and to also found something that would matter and that would give us a floor and an opportunity to engage in the German society. And this was my idea with the Jewish caucus, the Jewish group within the Social Democratic Party, because the Social Democratic Party was founded by Jews, but nobody remembers anymore because there are so few of them.
Now let's move to the present, the very present. We have the coronavirus. It's a pandemic. Everyone has been affected. You and I are both sitting in our homes and conducting this conversation. I want to talk about Europe and the coronavirus and how it's perceived by some outside Europe. So the conventional wisdom here over the last few weeks has been that that Europe as Europe did not rise to this occasion, but that nation states more or less kind of fell back on their non-EU identity, on their original identities as nation states, and were addressing the crisis for their populations only in various ways. Of course, Italy hard hit, France hard hit, Germany hard hit as well. Is this a fair estimation of Europe at this moment in time? What's your perspective on it?
Well, I like to differentiate, which makes me a difficult conversation partner, because it's also, one way from one point
One
of
hand
view,
to
from
the
the
other
other
hand. Well,
point of view.
that's many times that's the way we deal with issues.
I think it's. I wish that Europe would be able to do more, but Europe was not able to do more. And interestingly, it is just the same people who always insisted that European competences, that European institutions have as little to say in areas like health system and health policies. Just the same voices and the same people come today and say, you see, we always told you it's the nation states that were able to tackle the issues here. Well, why? Because those exact people prevented European Union getting more to say in the area of health issues. Health policies is it's a nation state competence. It's nothing that we found out through the crisis. It's something that always was the case. So European Union and von der Leyen and all these people, they were not able to act quickly and appropriately because this was not within the realm of their competences. I do think, though, that we had a very rough start with certain instances where we lacked European solidarity. But this European solidarity did not come from nation states. So the problem is precisely the same. If you start thinking nationally and nationalistically, then you cannot move forward like Europe as a whole. When Italy needed help and Germany, for a very brief moment, put an embargo on medical gear and medical equipment, just 2 days. It was very brief because Germany started in a crisis. Germany started thinking as a nation state, like everyone is saying is the best. And that was a very traumatizing and a very decisive mistake, because this is something that for Italians who were really, really in deep trouble, this is something that will stick, that becomes a narrative. And this is helped by outside actors like Russia, like China. Like here, our Cuban friends are those who brought us whatever they brought, like medical personnel a little bit. The Russians sent 9 military planes. Well, La Stampa said 80% of this equipment was not useful. But the foreign minister said, thank you, dear Russian friends, as opposed to our European friends. But when Germany takes over patients from Italy now, or France gives a lot of financial aid and in equipment, and we have constantly planes now of Boeing, Bundeswehr planes, the military planes from Germany bringing patients, bringing goods to Italy. This was not anymore visible because the paradigm and the narrative was stuck within the population. Europe cannot do much. Solidarity does not work. And then the closing of nation borders is, of course, also something that also gives a sign. On the one hand, it's comforting, and it's an easy thing to do. It's a symbolic thing to do, right? I mean, because we don't have, the pandemics is not limited to countries. Pandemics is limited to regions. So if you wanted to contain that, then you should have closed northern Italy, and you should have closed, some part of Western, Northern Westphalia in Germany, but not the borders to Poland. And yet this was done because this is a very low-cost thing to do for a national government, and it shows we are acting decisively, and it's kind of a military response to this. So, and the question is, how do we come back from there? But this is the next step. And
well, here in the United States, we have this well-known phrase, and maybe now it's taken the trip over to Europe and is used in Europe, which is all politics is local. I think that when you deal with public health, there is nothing more local than public health. I mean, these are the folks. This isn't even paying taxes. These aren't economic. They are economic issues, of course, which came with the pandemic. But in terms of the public health issue, the question is, how do you help people in this locality or that locality or where there is a hotspot? For example, in Milan or in New York City or in New Orleans in our own country or in Paris right now. So I know there were local imperatives, regional imperatives, national imperatives, if you will, but also we've come to see the EU for better and for worse as a working umbrella, perhaps the most successful of the umbrella organizations, multilateral organizations, and there have been a number of articles, as you know, and people who've been commenting on whether Europe, in the beginning at least, was up to the challenge. But as you say, it's a conundrum. It's an on one hand, on the other hand, and of course we'll continue to watch it closely. Sergey, on the Jewish agenda, nothing is higher than this dramatic ratcheting up of anti-Semitism, this explosion of anti-Semitism globally, wherever we look. And many people like to refer to it as the perfect storm, from the left, from the right, from the Islamic extremists. It's everywhere. And of course, here in our own country, we've experienced some things that we never thought we would see in terms of these attacks, particularly in Pittsburgh and in California and San Diego and so forth. So how are you assessing the situation in Europe? Because we always look to Europe knowing that I would say more of our problems relating to anti-Semitism have occurred in Europe than in any other place over the last couple of decades. How are you assessing it? And then if you could bring into it your experience with the working group on anti-Semitism. In fact, why don't you tell us a little how that group came to be and how it's working today?
Well, let's start from the group, and you probably can tell a better story and history about this group, because I joined this group when was it? Less than a year ago, and this group was already there. It was functioning, and I joined a group that your organization and many others have established or helped to establish and supported and continue to support, and I'm very grateful for that to you and your members. This is, for me, from my perspective, it's not kind of a regular working group or a task force as you would expect it to be. Our task and our work, I think, this is how I understand it, is to anchor the fight of anti-Semitism within the parliamentary structures within the European Union. Because some people say, you have a working group on anti-Semitism. Well, you have a carnival in Ust, not far away. Why don't you go there? Why don't you start, demonstrating against them? You have a working group on anti-Semitism. This is your task, and I think it is my task, but it's not. It's a task from a different angle. We want this parliament, and it's 750 members from all European countries, EU countries. It is important that they understand and they have on the radar the issue of anti-Semitism and the most recent arts of fighting it and methods of fighting it. Something that for many countries and many people is a totally, it's like a thing from a different world. They never dealt with this issue. And yet it is important to bring this issue back to the table and to the plenary and start talking. And so when von der Leyen was elected the Commission president, we were very happy that one of the first meetings was one of her first speeches and statements was with our group when she came and spoke to us in Brussels during the establishment of this group. We wrote a letter and addressed the issue of Ust Carnival which was not far away from, which is not far away from Brussels.
Just for the viewers, the Alst
Yeah.
Carnival is a carnival in Belgium, and it has featured, if you will, grotesque effigies, figures of Jews with all kinds of stereotypical features. And this had the approbation of UNESCO as a kind of an approved, sanctioned event. But ultimately, I mean, when people started to see exactly what was going on the ground, there was deep concern, because if there was ever anti-Semitism in public view, it was through these stereotypes. So please continue.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the tragedy of it is that the mayor and the town and the inhabitants continue to be proud of this carnival, and they see it as a matter of humor and freedom of speech. And this is the combination between local and global, right? That we have to master. On the one hand, look at what's happening 40 kilometers away from Brussels, but at the same time, look at the Europe and zoom out. And so zooming out is the second part of it. We work closely with Katharina von Schnurbein, who's a great expert, and she's a special representative, a special commissioner against anti-Semitism with the European Commission. And with her, we try to strategize what should we do, what kind of initiatives should we enact within the parliament, or, which is even more important, how can we measure implementation of certain acts that European Parliament or other European institutions already adopted. So there is this decision of the Council of European Union, all the members of the European Union, on anti-Semitism, which is very good. Well, the question is, what's happening on the ground? How do countries implement these very noble and very good things that they decided on? And this is something that if it weren't for coronavirus, we should have, I think, done as the next step, is to take a focus on certain countries and maybe even go there and check with them, what is the state of implementing this council decision that you signed for. We also do events in the parliament, and the last event, which unfortunately was canceled because of the coronavirus, was about anti-Semitism and sexism or gender discrimination. So we try to look at anti-Semitism from various perspectives and to build a broad coalition of partners and allies, because this is the thing. Because of this storm that you called, we will not be able to tackle it alone. We need much broader alliances and coalitions, and you as American organization know much better than we who just begin with this, in Europe. Building alliances in the fight against anti-Semitism is the main thing. Otherwise, we will not be able to win this battle.
So you're in the working group, and we appreciate also your close cooperation with our representative in Brussels, Alina Brickman. It means a lot to us. But let me ask you, the European Parliament is a large group. It's over 600 members. And while this is a priority and of deep concern to you and to your colleagues, Jewish and non-Jewish, who serve on this group, where would you say this issue is in terms of the priorities of your fellow members of the parliament, in terms of the broader human rights picture, or the narrower picture of anti-Semitism being a big problem in Europe? Where do you see that?
I think that after the attacks in Halle, it has become a much broader issue that resonates with many more people than it was at the beginning. But even before that, I mean, let's be honest, anti-Semitism is just one issue of many issues. We have other discrimination forms, and many members of the parliament have their own topics and their own agendas, and it's politics. It's like looking at in the Congress. You will not find all of the members of the Congress, well, Congress is maybe a different context, but any other parliament, national parliament, that would all be, so passionate about fighting anti-Semitism. So we need to instill this passion and to continue with this passion and win allies. So, for example, I work very closely with Roma and Sinto members of the European Parliament. Something that I think is really, really important. One of them I have in my own group. He's a German Sinto, a member of the Greens as well. And it makes such a huge difference when he and his friends see that there is a Jewish person here who is active on fighting anti-Semitism, but who also they can count on if it is about anti-Gypsyism, as the term is. And by the way, I think it's very important, for example, in terms of commemoration memorials. Next year, we have on the 27th of January every year, European Parliament has a ceremony and a commemoration ceremony of the Holocaust, and it usually is of course focused on Jewish issues. I think we should work on somehow bringing this together, or finding another way and form of giving the Roma and Sinto people an opportunity and a floor where they can be on part, because they were part of this strategy as well. So this is how we get with that, to work with that group. Of course, we have other people who are close on transatlantic relations. They're also open to those issues. So building coalitions on various issues, or people who write against right-wing extremism within the Green Party in Germany, and actually German members of parliament are usually much more open to those issues, or Austrian much more open on those issues. And in fact, the now Minister for Europe of the new Austrian government was the president of the working group of anti-Semitism. She was a member. She had been a member of the European Parliament before she became minister in the new government in Austria, and she was passionate about this issue, working on commemoration, etc. So, coming back to your question, to be honest, I don't expect all 750 members of the parliament, and forget about fascists, we're not talking about them, but because there is a group of fascist group as well. But from all others, I don't expect them to, leave everything, all their agendas behind, and all join the fight against anti-Semitism as a full-time job. No, I want them to open their minds and to sit down with me, like it just happened recently with some of my colleagues from the group, where we talked about boycott and about a different perspective on the boycott, something that she never considered, and something that, while talking to me, I'm not sure I could convince her of that, but I could open up your mind, and she realized there is this legitimate other perspective on those issues. And and next time, before I vote on that issue, this way or other way, I will at least get in touch with Sergey and at least get his view on that. And this is something that, that we try to move, step by step on those issues.
But this has been when we talked about the perfect storm on the left and the right. So on the far right, the extreme right, we have kind of classic anti-Semitism. On the left, as you mentioned, boycott now. On the left, we have these issues that, for us, frankly, in our community, are very clear. If you're calling for a boycott, if you are constantly engaged in a drumbeat of criticism that includes analogies of what Israel does to what Nazis have done, what South Africa has done, basically, you're treating Israel in a different category. You're treating it to a double standard. And perhaps more importantly, you are undermining, with a steady drumbeat, you are undermining its legitimacy. And the interesting thing I think that we have here, for example, if you go into the United Nations, and if you take Europe and how Europe votes on various issues affecting Israel or affecting Middle East issues in which Israel is involved, we've had for years votes abstentions, or we haven't had, frankly, enough votes against some of these measures and these resolutions that have been very harmful to Israel. So this is an extremely important issue. This disconnect between saying, look, I'm against anti-Semitism, but when it comes to Israel, well, the checkpoints are akin to Warsaw Ghetto, and this that is contributing to the problem. Within that context of this rhetoric, how do you deal with it? When I mean, you were just talking about your colleague who is engaged in the boycott discussion.
Well,
how much does this come into the conversation? Perhaps maybe that's a better way.
First of all, I speak out my mind. That's already important for people of various political shadings to see that within their midst there are people who think differently, and specifically on this point, and who belong to this same group. We also do have, and that's what I wanted to mention, with German members of our group, but also with certain others, we have a group of people which is quite big. We're the largest Green delegation in the group, who see this quite clearly, and who, from the left perspective, are very dedicated to watching carefully in which direction such criticism goes, and that's how you work with it. We're not a church. We're a parliament, and we're not a synagogue. We're a synagogue. In synagogue, you never have the same opinion. But we're not. It's a political field, and you're trying to score as many points as possible in order to kind of steer the political processes in the direction you believe are the best. And that's how it works. I don't expect, to be honest, I don't want my colleagues who think otherwise not to say this. I want to know that there is a problem. And I want to confront, and I want to start talking to them, and I will probably lose certain battles, but maybe I will instill some doubts. And to be honest, I think we are among ourselves in this little room of virtual reality. It is a difficult situation in the region. It's not. I don't think it's fair to defend everything at any cost. And that makes it even more difficult. But it also opens a window to say, yes, I agree. There is a benevolent occupation, as Israeli Supreme Court calls it, the Constitutional Court calls it themselves. But I don't think that you can compare this to any other or any weird comparisons with South Africa, or even worse with times during Nazis, and that gives you credibility because it doesn't bring anything to forget about realities and real problems and try to whitewash everything. It's not the point. We want a fair approach, and this fair approach means also that we don't want to discriminate against a member of the international community, being Israel.
Sergey, one last question before we conclude. It relates an internet question, because you have today, right now, for example, so many conspiracy theories about the coronavirus and Jews and Zionists and Israel. That's out there. Of course, anti-Semitism has been out there on the internet, social media now for so long, and I think that really is the great difference. We've in the past, of course, anti-Semitism has been with us forever. But it has just been trumpeted. There's this extra dimension that has allowed it to go wild because of the internet. Now, about in the United States about our First Amendment issues. And, we in our community, of course, have been working now for some time with the providers, the Facebooks and the Googles, to talk about, to try to rein this in, because so much of it goes out on those platforms. Now, the view of the internet in terms of laws is different in Europe. And so, how are you dealing with the question of hate on the internet?
Well, in Germany, we have. I mean, first of all, this is not an issue for again for European jurisdiction. There is a European framework decision. This is so-called framework decision. These are decisions where it's basically guidelines that are binding, but these are recommendations, binding recommendations to the states on how to deal with hate speech, for example, or with the Holocaust denial. So there is a framework decision of the European Council that says Holocaust denial should be banned all over Europe, or denial of genocide. Great Britain never implemented this, but this is already an outgoing issue, so to speak. And that requires hate speech being banned. The question is not just banning hate speech, but how do you deal with it on the internet? We have in Germany the law that binds, that forces social media providers and social services providers to themselves to delete any content which would be unlawful and illegal according to the German laws. And if they don't do, they pay very substantial fines. I am not sure that this is the right way to go. I'm more American than my European friends, also on that issue. I'm not sure that by merely regulating and also granting this competencies to Facebook and to YouTube to judge about the content, what is legal and what is not legal. And it's not just about anti-Semitism. It's about anything. Yeah, it's about much more. I'm not sure that this makes us better, because I see examples like in Russia or in Turkey where such ways of censoring internet really leads to very bad examples and very bad situation in terms of freedom of speech. I think that education, monitoring, also marking certain content as, for example, fake news, not deleting them, because what is fake news? Hungary said fake news now is criminalized. Who decides that? And flagrantly anti-Semitic content, yes, it should be deleted because this is illegal according to the German hate speech laws. So we need to we cannot ban everything, and there will always be some ambivalent content. But if it is illegal in the real life, why should this be legal on the internet? And that law actually allows this law enforcement to go online, so to speak. I'm just not sure whether we should leave it up to Facebook to do this, to prosecute.
Well, the idea is really to work with the Facebooks and the Googles, and to constantly monitor this kind of rhetoric.
On that, I agree.
Clearly, I mean, those of us who follow it every day are more in sync with the threats. And when we have our First Amendment freedoms here, we also the famous dictum: you can't, even with all of this, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And when you're inciting against people, particularly with the trumpet that the internet is, there is a special responsibility that all of us have, whether in government like yourself, in legislative affairs, in the nonprofit community, in the NGO community where we are, in academia, et cetera. All of us have a special responsibility living in a situation where we have these First Amendment freedoms, but where we also can't yell fire in a crowded theater, to find a way to make sure that that hatred and incitement does not really have a place and have a platform. It's an ongoing discussion. We'll leave it for the next time, and we'll leave a few other issues perhaps that we haven't touched. But Sergey, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to see you again. Maybe not under these circumstances of coronavirus. Maybe meet in person or do another program. But we thank you, and thank you for all you're doing in the European Parliament. We deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to further cooperation. Thank you, and stay safe, and with all the best regards to all the Americans, and with all the solidarity, please stay safe and healthy, and I do hope that we overcome all those terrible things that are happening now.
We hope so indeed. Well, thank you everyone for watching One-on-One with B'nai B'rith International. Please visit our website, which is b'naibrith.org, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and lastly, tell a friend about us. And for my distinguished guest, Sergey Lagodinsky, I'm Dan Mariaschin. We'll talk to you next time on One-on-One with B'nai B'rith International. Stay safe.